Thank you so much for watching my show, William Wallace for America. I love bringing on people that are working hard in our country to provide not only information to inform us, but information to empower us. And I say that because I think we're at a time in this election cycle that more people find it easier to get motivated, while I feel that it's more powerful to be informed. And information comes in many ways, many different directions from many different people. But the more informed you are, the more passionate you become about being involved in your community, your state, and finding ways to fix our country and bring people together. And information might not necessarily be on election integrity, it might be on guns, it might be on the First Amendment, it might be on medical freedom. But whatever you find it easier to be informed on, it's an important and integral part in fixing our country and getting it back to the people's hands, where the people have the power to not only improve their lives and their communities' lives, but the lives of the people in our country. With me today is one such person that's not only doing that, she's got lots of topics, lots of things that I really want you to look into. I'm going to be scrolling her site at the bottom. Check that out. She has two sites that are not only informative and empowering, but they might show you some ways to improve your own life. Courtenay Turner is with me today. Courtenay, thank you so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I was really blessed in many ways to meet you a while back at a Mike Lindell symposium. And ever since I've kept up with you and stayed in touch with you, you always have more information that I go, wow, I need to know more about that. And then you're doing a show on it, or then you're doing a conference on it. And I just find it amazing.
Thank you.
Let's get started about introducing people your platforms. What are the things that you like to talk about the most? Can you kind of give us an introduction to some of the things that brought you to where you are and what you're working on now?
Sure. So I don't have like a one specific topic.
I
My
know.
it's pretty broad, but I think we have over 500 videos on there now. It's a CourtenayTurner.com is the best place to find me. You can, and any podcast platform that you prefer is probably on there, with the exception of YouTube. We're on the fifth YouTube channel, and I just have kind of given up on posting there. It doesn't seem to be worth the time. But I'm on all the others, and I spell my name like Courtenay, so Courtenay, Turner.com. And yeah, it's a long form style podcast where we go pretty deep on all sorts of topics, really, trying to investigate the roots of the New World Order and empower people to take ownership of free will is kind of my main theme that covers a wide span of topics, obviously. So I don't have like a one topic, but that's kind of my mission. That's the through line of it. I also do a weekly radio show, and I typically film those and put them up on my channel as well. And then I also do a typically more medically focused show with Dr. Lee Merritt. We call it the Dangerous Dames. And and I recently did a cognitive liberty conference, and my mission there was to instill cognitive liberty, because I think that we have been dumbed down, brainwashed, programmed. The children, unfortunately, in many cases it's been child abuse. So I wanted to, it's a 2-day conference, and I wanted to give people tools to instill cognitive liberty. The first day was in the youth. So the focus on education. The second day was on political and psychological dialectical warfare tactics. So we went pretty deep into the historical roots and philosophical roots of what is the dialectic. And then we discuss ways that it is being used and weaponized on everybody today, and what it is we can do to step outside the wizard circle.
I like that. I've never heard that before, the wizard circle.
Yeah, I believe it was actually Vogelin who coined the term. He's written quite a bit about Hegel. And these people like Hegel, who I'm sure you've heard of the Hegelian dialectic, and that's really what was kind of the cornerstone of our focus. They do think they're wizards. They're studiers of Hermetic principles, and a lot of that is very It's wizardry. I don't really know. I know that
So,
sounds hokey if I say that, but
for my listeners, what the Hegelian dialectic? Explain that real quick.
so I'll just give the broad stroke
Right.
overview because Hegel can be quite verbose and there is lots of nuance. But the most important thing for people to understand is, yes, there were left Hegelians, there were right Hegelians. However, the most important thing to know is that for both of them, the state equals God. So Hegel literally saw the state as being the all-knowing, the omnipotent, and that the goal was to advance towards this, advance the historicity of man towards the omega point. He didn't use the term omega point. That was Teilhard de Chardin, but it's still the same concept of the universal all. The one, the final point that becomes
Right.
condensed. It's the idea of the alpha was what we started with, this tiny
Exactly right.
and then returning through the omega. But for him, he, typically people think of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That was actually a term that was kind of a trifecta that was codified by Fichte, who was very largely influential on Hegel, but it was Fichte's analysis of Kant's dialectic. However, Hegel rejected both Kant and Plato's notion of the dialectic because he felt that it was too abstract, more of like an intellectual concept.
Right.
He wanted something that could be more of a methodology. So like the, phenomenology of science, he was talking about what was a way that you could make this into a method that would advance the historicity of man. He thought that there were world historical figures, people like Napoleon, who he very much revered, and he thought that they advanced the course of history. And so he very much looked up to people like that. And he thought that was the goal, that man's goal was to advance the historicity of man towards statism. He believed that you could have absolutely no no freedom at all without complete 100% subservience to the state. So the state was essentially God. And this is, when you see like Hegel's dialectic, it looks like a spiral. And you'll see a lot of these like new thought leaders and a lot of the new agers, they use these spirals also. And it is because it's this notion of, I personally think it's a Gnostic Jacob's ladder. They're looking for a way to return to the undifferentiated all, which is how Plato and the Neoplatonists talked about it. And so it's this idea of the conflict between the one versus the many, and they see the one as being better. So some of the New Agers, like Madame Blavatsky, will talk about how our journey in life is all about returning to source. So that's our goal, and that is as we spiritually evolve, we return to source. So for Hegel, he used the abstract, negative, and concrete. That was actually his the trilectic, if you will,
Right.
of what he codified. And the as you move up the rungs on the ladder, what it was, the term he used was Aufheben, which is a German term that's kind of oxymoronic. It means to lift up and preserve while simultaneously canceling and tearing down.
Right.
And the more familiar use of that word might be the Frankfurt School's Aufheben de Culture, which of course means to cancel culture. But it was this idea that, each time you've got these dialectical poles that are these supposed oppositions, and then they merge, they negate each other. And as that happens, you move up the rung. So that's the Aufheben, and you move up each time until you get to this point of, the state.
Well, what's interesting is, look, I could not have asked for a better, not only description for people who need to be brought up to scale on that, no pun intended, up to scale, but also it's a perfect layup for me to have because you did it perfectly for me to make the analogy on a political analogy, that is, to what the Democrats are doing with government today. It's almost like on a political side, the left, and look, and I'm not even talking about people who vote Democrat. I'm talking about like the left side of the establishment, the furthest leftist most of the establishment, on the left will say, it's almost like that's their parallel goal, is that they want the state to be the God that basically says, hey, look, the state is going to control your health care. The
Mhm.
state is going to, government, and they do it in a friendly way. Oh, we're here to help you. You
Mhm.
know, we're going to create a health insurance program to take care of you so you don't have to pay for anything. We're going to create food programs. We're going to create, home assistance programs. And
Mhm.
they do all of these things that give power
Mhm.
to that state or their God, so to speak, because government bureaucracy is their religion. It's their God. It's their
Mhm.
supreme being.
Yes.
Because when everybody is channeled in there, it gives control to the state.
Yes.
Is that a good analogy? Am I
It's
kind
a
of
good analogy. I would tweak it a little bit,
please,
because
please
the
do, please do.
dialectic is the GOP, right? The GOP plays the controlled opposition. This is why you have really kind of a unification of the two. They both are advancing and growing the state. This is why, unfortunately, when people expect the Republicans to be fighting back against some of these agendas, they're not. And they're not, because they're doing what they were designed to do, which is to play the other half of the dialectic. This is why when people talk about they're like, but there were left Hegelians and there were right Hegelians. There were the old Hegelians, the young. And like, I get that. But for people who are just learning this concept, the most important thing to understand is both of them see the state as it's, as you said, it's a religion worshiping the state. And that's the most important thing to understand. So I think it's really incumbent on people who are in opposition to that notion to be pushing back. Especially, I would ideally like to see us take over, the Republican Party and put in true conservative, constitutional conservatives in place. But I think we need to be holding them accountable. We need to be pushing back, and we need to be limiting their power as much as possible. The whole purpose of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in particular was not to grant privileges and powers to the government. It was to limit their powers so that they could not infringe upon what the Declaration of Independence
Mhm.
declared to be our inalienable rights that were endowed by our Creator.
See, I knew what a treat we're gonna have for our listeners today. And, because I say the same thing, but I say it in a more political perspective,
Mhm.
which when I brought up the analogy on the left, but
Right.
again, you're giving me the perfect layup because I always bring up that people, "Oh, you're a Republican." Like, I think we're all Republican. I don't think people realize how many people unite on conservative values. And
Mhm.
I find that people that are slightly left of center and slightly right of center, we all have more in common than we realize, especially when it comes to conservatism. They just don't realize it because the far right has stolen the word conservative as a way to, in your opinion, also, and I agree with, advance government.
Mhm.
It's a way to control people on the right side of the fence, like the left side, the establishment side of
Mhm.
the left controls the left side, people that lean left. And as a result, they get that division that they need to advance that ultimate agenda of making government bigger to
Mhm.
be able to basically, I'll just say it, launder money in ways that are unconstitutional
Mhm.
or create a lot of unconstitutional um create an unconstitutional environment for the
Yeah.
people of America.
I agree. I would say it probably a little bit more simply. I just think that both the left and the right are very invested in subverting the Constitution. There's,
I
the
love it.
left has been very effective, I would say, since the inception of the Constitution. They've been hard at work because there was and the more colloquial way to say it would be a Marxist kind of infiltration, but it's really a communist agenda that was at play even from the founding of the United States. And so they've always been trying to subvert the Constitution, but I think they've been so effective and so successful that now they feel emboldened, and they feel that their next, means of their next strategic tactic is to capture the right. And so you have this rising movement on the right of what I call the post-liberal right. And they're really they're attacking the Constitution. Whether I don't know that everybody who's in that movement is aware of that or not, but that's effectively what they're doing. So now you
So
have it from both sides.
so now you got my interest peaked on why you think that they're trying to hijack the Constitution on the right. But before you go there, my question that came up to my mind before that is, Why do you think it is that the left wants to alienate people, or hijack the Constitution on the left side of the fence? Why do you think that people on the far right establishment is doing it on the right? You mentioned that the left is subverting the Constitution, and so is the right.
Mhm.
How do you think the right is doing it, or why do you think the right is doing it, and why do you think the left is doing it? What are their ultimate goals?
Well, I think their ultimate goals is to subvert the United States. I mean, it's to take over control of the United States. People, I call them the futurists. People like Brzezinski and Kissinger, Jacques Attali, who is known as the Kissinger of France. They've written extensively about this for a very, very long time. But they talked about how the United States would cease to exist. It would no longer be a superpower. And that nation states would cease to exist. They talk about estimating around 2050 that there would just be remnants of power blocks, which is what you see with some of these treaties. That's what they were trying to accomplish. Like things like they did not get it, but like the North American Treaty that they were trying to put forth, but certainly NATO, and that's what they're trying to do, is create these power block structures so that ultimately they're going to subsume nation states. Now, I personally don't know that that's going to be effective. I think it was a tactic they were trying. But what I do see being very effective is these supranational corporate entities. And they do seem to be having power that supersedes the nation states. And a really good example of this would be during COVID. We saw this where it didn't matter if you lived in, a really rural part of New York State, which tends to be, a lot of like manufacturing, some farming. It didn't matter if you lived there or if you lived in New York City proper, like right in the heart of Manhattan. If you walked into a big box store like a Target or a Walmart, then you were subject to whatever policies those supranational corporations had imposed. And so if you would have to wear a mask, even if you lived out in the middle of nowhere where, you might be one of 5 people shopping at that store. It's very different. And I'm not saying I agree with the
Right.
idea of wearing them, but I'm just saying that even if you were to buy into that logic, it really doesn't make sense when you've got like 5 other people in a really massive store, right? So this is a really great example of how that works. But your question about like trying to subvert the Constitution, so I think that's the purpose. The purpose is that we do have these power structures who are vying for control, and I believe that they have a lot invested in seeing the decline of the United States. I think it's the very same people who propped up the United States that put them in power so that they could be torn down. Quite honestly, when you read some of the works of the trilaterals, they talk about that quite extensively. The trilaterals, being like a Rockefeller, Brzezinski, Carter, they talk about creating this internationalist economic world order, and creating the empire essentially of the United States. But of course, that's the further tentacle is really this Anglo-American establishment, and that goes back to the 1800s. That's a much more involved kind of concept. But yeah, so I think that because they've had so much success in the left in indoctrinating them and having them feel that the Constitution belongs in the garbage, and that it's you hear these kinds of narratives from them all the time, that it should be a living document and that it was created by a bunch of people who are dead and it doesn't apply anymore. I'm not saying I agree with these, but these are the types of tropes that you'll hear from the left. However, what you're now seeing from the right, and there's again, I bring up these futurists, these architects of the future. They talked about how there would be a clashing intentionally between the East and the West, and between ideological positions. So fascism and communism, capitalism and communism, so forth. In order to create dialectics, manage dialectics to usher in technocracy. And that's really where they're headed right now. And you see this from both the left and the right. And the technocracy is, this idea that these experts will control and run the world essentially, but of course the nation. However, now the literal technology has advanced to the point where this does lead itself to and lend itself towards a transhuman agenda. And the best example I can point to, so that people don't think I'm just making up stuff, is you can go to the AIWS, which is the AI World Society, aiws.net. You can also go to the Boston Global Forum. They talk about how there will be in the centennial, this is the UN100.net, I think also. This is the centennial of the UN. They will have a AI World Society, which is essentially like this virtual world. They talk about where governments will be supplanted by AI government. They talk about a complete virtual reality where there's going to be a node, like a intricate web of nodes, places. And they talk a lot about Ukraine. They're always doing symposiums on how Ukraine needs to be rebuilt. We need to give lots of support and funding to Ukraine in order to make it the locus of all of these various nodes on this AI World Society for various 15-minute cities, smart cities,
I
C40
wonder
cities.
why Ukraine.
I'm curious about that too. I have some speculation, but I really don't know. That I don't have any concrete, answers on. But they do seem very invested in Ukraine, and that's where they're looking to make. And they've done several symposiums on it. They call it Rebuilding Ukraine. But the book is written by Michael Dukakis, former governor of Massachusetts. He wrote a book called Remaking the World: The Age of Global Enlightenment. And it's a very new age title, and the concepts are very new agey. But it lays out very clearly. They have all sorts of documentation on how this AI World Society is going to function and the infrastructure behind it. They talk about things like 6G, leveraging the power of humans, harnessing the power of humans in order to operate. They talk about how 6G will be used to create the internet of nanobio things, and that we'll have biosensors all throughout us. These things sound like dystopian science fiction. Sounds like
I was getting ready to say all this sounds like science fiction. Now,
it
Michael
does.
Dukakis, he's not on our side, then, right?
What?
Michael Dukakis is on the world on the other side, right? He's not on our
I
side.
don't think he's, well, it depends on what you advocate. I don't think I don't like the ideas he's putting forth. He's not
Yeah,
not
it doesn't sound like I like him either. I was not aware of this, but my point is, a lot of people listening to our talk today are
Mhm.
going to go, "That's all sounds like science fiction. That all sounds like Isaac Asimov stuff." Or
So
actually, Isaac Asimov was very factual, but this all science fiction.
Mhm.
These are not the droids that you're looking for, kind of thing. I mean, this is and
Well,
besides the website that you just cited, what other proof do you have for people who might be shaking their heads saying no to this
Well,
right
you can
now?
absolutely download these books. So the Remaking the World, The Age of Global Enlightenment, all you need is an email. So you can, if you want to make up another email, so it's not your primary, they will ask for email, and then you can read the book for yourself. You can go to these various websites. What I told you about 6G, harnessing the power of humans in order to operate. University of Massachusetts Amherst has published that. They published it a few years ago, actually. So that you can just do a quick search, that will come up. That's not like a difficult thing to find. All of this technology, I mean, I think it was the CEO, Albert, I never pronounced his name correctly, so I'm not going to try, of Pfizer, but he talks about how we can be able to take a pill and it's going to let us know, what we've taken that day, what minerals we need, if we need, how much of our medicine we've taken. That he talked about that very openly at the World Economic Forum meeting. So, this stuff is not, I know it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like science fiction because a lot of people don't read. And that's, I don't mean that to be derogatory or pejorative, but I always give you my sources. And that's why I give you my sources. It's like, hey, don't take my word for it. Please go do some research. Maybe you
Right.
will learn way more than I know. And I hope that's the case. I hope to teach you how to fish. I'm not just trying to give you a bunch of fish. So
Exactly.
yeah, so I want people to go and do the research. And I mean, I really try to be very thorough and diligent, but I'm human. I make mistakes. So, there's always that possibility. And also, I always see things through, I mean, we all see things through our lens. So of course I have my own biases, from my past experiences, from my knowledge base. So, that's going to cloud what I see as well. But the things I'm telling you are all verifiable. You can look up anything. If I say something that's one of my theories, I will let you know. Like, I don't have the information to verify this, but all these data points seem to point in this direction. Therefore, this is my conjecture. And I will let you know that. But yeah, this stuff is all documented. And they really do tell you, right? Who was it? Who wrote the Open Conspiracy? right? This is really what it is. Everything is hidden in plain sight. It's this
Right.
idea that, and I think that's partly because of their religious beliefs. They do believe that if they tell you, then they're not culpable because you already had the knowledge, and so you made the choice. That this is why I think what we're up against is going to be an opt-in tyranny.
This is interesting. You say opt-in tyranny, you said?
Opt-in tyranny, yes.
So explain that. That's I haven't heard that term before.
Well, so I think the best way I can explain it is to give you an example. So,
Opt-in tyranny.
yeah, so the best example I can give you is there was something called LifeLog. And this was basically a centralized database. It was part of the TIA, Total Information Awareness, back under the Clinton era. And this is actually where we get our GPS from. This is, part of the technology that was, created and developed during that time. And I mean, they had created it long before that, but they really advanced it during that time. And the GPS then became, kind of a public commodity, something that we could all access, and wasn't just relegated to the government and military industrial complex.
Right.
But during that time, there was something called LifeLog, and that had a database on everybody, basically everything. And they ended up shutting it down in February 4th, 2004, because they determined that it was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And there was too much pushback. And what went up February 4th, 2004? Facebook.
Oh, that's right.
Facebook went up February 4th, 2004. And so Facebook is exactly the same thing as LifeLog. It has all your data. It has, it's collecting as much information as possible on you. However, you choose to opt into it. So everybody knows that that Facebook data is being overseen through the NSA and, all of these various intelligence apparatus in our government structure. And the people accept it because this is social media. They've made it fun. You've chosen now, hey, I want to share pictures with my family. I want to connect with my childhood friends.
Right.
I want it, right? So they've made
Right.
it fun. They've made it sexy. And so people say, okay, I'm willing to give up some of my privacy, but they've chosen to opt in. And that's what they do. So we saw this with the injections, right? People they didn't roll out. They didn't even roll out the digital ID. I mean, they warned of doing that,
Right.
or the jab ID. They didn't even do that. They just said, well, you might not be able to travel. You might not get a job, or you might not keep the job you have, or you might not be able to see your grandmother if she's in a certain facility. And so then you had to choose, well, I prefer that. I know so many people who took it just because they were afraid they might not be able to travel.
Right.
And for no other reason. They were like, it was almost a convenience. Well, I just, I thought I might not be able to travel, so I took it. And so it's an opt-in. So now you've opted in to having more of your liberties restricted.
I love it. I'm glad you went into detail on that because I never really thought when you said it, I'm like, oh, I like it hit me right away. But I wanted to get you the chance to explain it because I think that I'm gonna start using that term because you're exactly right. When we think about all the freedoms that we give up,
Yeah.
it's opt-in tyranny. That there's tyranny going on behind the scenes with, whether it's bureaucracy creating rules and laws and regulations that circumvent the Constitution, whether it's medical freedom, First Amendment rights, when a social media platform deplatforms somebody, doesn't, takes them off or the case or censors them, you're like, like YouTube. I mean, I know that when I put content up, that they're going to suspend me every couple months. They're going to, constantly. So basically, whenever I put content up, I'm like opt-in tyranny almost, where I'm opting in to letting them take my First Amendment speech away. Although I see it as a game though with them too. I kind of like, you know what? I'm gonna put all kinds of content up, and you're gonna have to pay somebody to edit me, to censor me. But that being said, back to another question I wanted to ask you earlier. Is the Constitution that powerful? Earlier, we were talking about, all these different treaties and the trilateral commissions and all these other things that are finding ways to eliminate freedom, not only in America, but create a one world government, if you will. but they're trying. But it seems like the Constitution is really holding them back in at least America for that. For now. Do you think the Constitution is that powerful? And before you answer that question, because I believe that God, our Creator, gave us our rights. He gave us our freedoms and liberties. And I believe that our founding fathers were inspired by the words of God, and they created a document here in America that that not only protects our God-given rights, but empowers us as individuals. And on the surface, that's all I have to say about that. But underneath the surface, are you saying that the Constitution is that powerful and has stopped all these world governments in their tracks?
Yeah, I do think the Constitution, particularly, I think the Bill of Rights, quite honestly. I actually have some problems with some of the amendments thereafter. I think the 16th Amendment, I have a few that I think were actually not constitutional until they were ratified. And there's some actual argument to, some evidence that could be put forth to suggest that those weren't actually ratified. They were just pushed through. But that aside, I do think the Bill of Rights, I think the Declaration of Independence is what stipulates what you just said, that we were endowed with inalienable rights from our Creator.
Mhm.
And the Bill of Rights was designed to lay those out and very clearly explicit that those could not be infringed upon, and not by the government, not by any external source either. Those were to be protected. And I think those are very powerful. I always use the analogy of the beekeeper. They say when all the bees go, that the world will cease to exist. And so I feel America is very much like the beekeeper, because when America falls, so the world follows. And that's not to say that there aren't, like, beautiful, wonderful places all over the world and phenomenal people all over the world. I believe there are, absolutely.
Right.
However, I think there is something very special about our founding documents, because there's no other, particularly the Declaration of Independence, there's no other document that's been codified around the world that I know of that stipulates that we were endowed with inalienable rights from our Creator, and that went on to create the Bill of Rights type of document that lays out those rights that cannot be infringed upon. And so I see America as the beekeeper for the free will of humanity. I think it's why people all over the world do look to America. I noticed that largely in 2020, people were so concerned about our election. And, I found that very interesting because, I'm not saying this proudly, but I don't pay that much attention to elections that are happening all over the world. Sometimes I may tune in, but it's
Right.
not like I'm so closely
Right.
so attentive and invested the way that these people were. And I know, because they were reaching out to me. So they were very invested. And I do think it's because they see us as the hope for preserving free will. So I do think those documents are actually very, very powerful. I think that's part of why they want to trample on them. They've been largely trampled on already. So I think it's incumbent upon to uphold them. And as you talked about the founding fathers and their inspiration from God, there's a lot of discussion about how our nation is inherently Christian, and that's not really 100% true. And it never really was. Do I think that the founding principles, I would argue actually the founding principles of the entire West are founded on Judeo-Christian principle. And I know there are people, particularly on the post-liberal right, who will argue with me and say there's no such thing as Judeo-Christian, that that's a false construct and it's a geopolitical pawn. And I don't agree. When I say Judeo-Christian values and principles, I'm referring to the Ten Commandments. Last time I checked, those actually did come from the Old Testament. And yes,
Right.
right? So, and they're upheld by the New Testament. So this is the Judeo-Christian founding values. These are the principles that our founding fathers were referring to when they say that the values and the principles. And there are
Right.
people like Jefferson who said that the Constitution could only work for religious and moral people. There was also a lot of economic discussion about how laissez-faire economics could actually only work if there were some founding principles and values to act as a checks and balance against just a free-for-all kind of some of the less desirable aspects of
Right.
humanity, the greed and avarice and some of those kinds of aspects of humanity. So I think that when we look back at what inspired them, honestly, this was a product of the Enlightenment. And there's a lot of talk, we bring up the post liberal right again, and there's a lot of
Right.
discussion about how the Enlightenment is the root of all the problems, and people are becoming more aware of what was going on with the Masons and, certainly the French Revolution. And I have a major issue with people lumping the Enlightenment all into under one umbrella. There were many warring factions among the Enlightenment. There were several thinkers in the Enlightenment, and they did not all agree with each other. In fact, they had very wide discrepancies amongst them. So I'm like, which Enlightenment are we referring to? The French Enlightenment, the German Enlightenment, the British Enlightenment? And our founding fathers, particularly Wilson and Jefferson and Madison, were largely influenced by Scottish common sense realism. And this is like Thomas Reid, Beatty, and a few others, but that really is what largely influenced them. And it was a very interesting kind of philosophy, because it was, that you at the time you kind of had two camps. You had people who were very mystical, where everything was all in the camp of faith, all
Right.
predicated on faith, whether that be the super religious or the counter Enlightenment people who might be more of the occultic type of mystical vein,
Right.
people like Hegel and Marx and Engels. I would put them into the counter Enlightenment category. And so you had those people. So either way, though, if it was all religion, all counter to
Right.
biblical kind of faith, you're still looking at something that is predicated all on faith. And then you had the other camp where they were quite rooted in material, empirical type of discovery. It was a very I think this is kind of where the scientism religion
Right.
really arrived. And the Scottish common sense was a bit of a hybrid. It was this idea that there were things that we could know through our common sense, and common sense meaning the five senses, things that were apparent to all humans, but that there was also things that we didn't know because we are not God. And so there were things that we could take a leap of faith. So it was founded on Christian metaphysics. However, it incorporated this realistic notion that there are things that humans can know and intuit. So
What's interesting, I have two good thoughts here, is one, you brought up the Masons. Our
mhm.
founding fathers, many of them were Masons,
Yeah,
and
that's
and and so I don't think the Masons are evil, and I certainly don't think they're running the world. But you also brought up Scottish thought in there. So when you track the true history of the Masonic order, they started out as the Knights Templar
hmm
that guarded not only the Israel and the temple in Israel, but they guarded all the money of all the kings of England. And then there was a conspiracy against them. I'm making a long story short, which ended on Friday the 13th, and many of them escaped to Scotland, where they became the Masonic order. And that's where a lot of this free thinking from Scottish thought, like you're referring to just a second
Well, Scottish
ago.
common sense realism is a very specific school of thought, but yeah.
Right. But so there's it's I just find it interesting, maybe coincidental is what I'm saying,
Mhm.
but that as they went to Scotland and they recreated under the Masonic order, many of those people went on to become our in that from the Masonic order become our founding fathers, who are very free thinkers,
Mhm.
believers in freedom, believers in God and our creator. Do you have a thought on that
I
before
have
I
a
ask
lot
my
of thoughts on them that it might not be super popular, but this is what I will say to people. It becomes a deep dive, and I know, like on the surface, it looks like a lot of conspiracy theory, but this is mainline history. It's just a lot of us haven't read it. I had not until the past few years. But when you look into the history of the Masons, I do think there are a lot of things that don't look so great. We'll just say that. However, again, to put it as a blanket, like everybody who's a Mason is evil, is absolutely not true. I know plenty of Masons who are wonderful, good, decent people. Is there a secret society where there are initiations, and have there been things that get executed through the covert nature of a secret society? Absolutely. And there are many offshoots of the Masonry. So they don't just operate under that one umbrella. There's lodges all over the world. There are different secret societies that have spun off of the Masonry.
Right.
However, at that time, not all they were actually much more divided, I would argue, than they are today. They didn't all agree with each other. There were definitely competing factions of Masonry back then, and there was also a big issue with an infiltration from the Illuminati, which is a very, very, I would argue, that had a very sinister agenda. I'm not saying that there was never sinister agenda in the Masonry itself, but there were people, good, decent people involved who probably had no awareness of that agenda. However, there was this problem of the Illuminati being infiltrated, and our founding fathers actually were very aware of that because of the French Revolution, and they warned the American populace of this infiltration. So there are some books that you can still get access to today. George Washington warned the American populace of the infiltration of the Illuminati. He used the book Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robeson to do so. Jefferson used the book Code of the Illuminati. They were both published in 1798. So this is, written during that time. I believe Madison actually had that book on his shelf as well, but he didn't use it as a warning.
I'm gonna get the names of those books from you later. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that, so there's a lot going on. I think there's a lot more nuance than people want to give credence to, because that makes things very difficult to parse through. And it means you have to deal with with people. There's always situational pressures involved. You never know what they were up against. You don't know whether that come from, family environments, their working environment. I mean, it's no different than people today. So I think typically people want to lump things into like black and white categories, and it's often not that simple at all.
I love how you put that. So now earlier we were, and I love letting you. You've got such great information, and you've got such great proof and good facts and everything like that. We could do this for 3 hours. But earlier you reminded me of a show that I did a while back, not really that long ago. I'd love for people to go back and listen to it. I'd love actually if you would listen to it, because I would hope that you would get as much from it as I'm getting from your information right now.
Okay.
I believe that freedom runs in our DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking about the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And then you referred to the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
But in my podcast, Freedom Runs in Our DNA, I referred to history proves that not only freedom runs in our DNA, but there are documents throughout history that not only prove it, but also talk about man's desire for it. Because it goes back to the 10 tables of Rome. I don't know if you're familiar with the 10
Mm-hmm.
tables of Rome. So when you research the 10 tables of Rome, this was almost like the Constitution of that time, where they came up with the rights of man, or the rights and the laws of man. Of course, we have the Rights of Man, which is a book that was written later by Thomas Paine, Rights of Man. If I got that right, for somebody out there who's like, oh, that wasn't, but we've got the book, The Rights of Man. Then we've got the 10 Commandments, which I think are more about freedom than they are about law. And I'm not, of course, there's religious scholars that say that that's being blasphemous. They are laws, but when you look at the 10 Commandments, they're also a reflection of our freedoms. They reflect our freedom, but they say, but you can't do this. It kind of reflects what we can do up to a certain point, which is where the 10 Commandments come in. And then you've got the 10 pillars of Rome, which I was talking about a minute ago, or the 10 tables, as some call it, where, at that time, the individual came up with, when democracy was created, and they came up with the rights of the individual, of the citizens of that time. And you have of course, you have the patricians, and you have the plebeians, but still in all, Then we fast forward to the Magna Carta,
Mhm.
and once again, man is realizing, hey, we've got rights here, and all of these throughout history, we have these periods of time when these documents have erupted,
Mhm.
in a way when, we go through history and man forgets that we have individual rights, and man
Mhm.
becomes, more passive, and, and becomes less assertive about their rights. And then government or monarchy or the patricians or whoever it was at the time takes over. And all of
Right.
a sudden man goes, wait a minute, I've got my rights here. And
Mhm.
they cut, and of course these documents have erupted through history that I think prove that DNA is in our DNA, that freedom is in our DNA. And of course, now in modern times, we have our Constitution. And I think, I don't think we've seen the end of it. I think, that we're at a point in time when, while I think the powers that be are becoming, desperate, maybe, as we can see in the Democrat Party here, with their candidate right now, that they're getting desperate for power.
Yeah.
We look around the world and you can see Putin, you can see China, you can see all of these people are becoming power hungry. And
Right.
whether they are evil themselves, or whether that thread of evil has guided them in a way to take over man's freedom, I think that we're about to see a renaissance for
Mhm.
freedom in our world, not just our country, but in
Mhm.
our world.
Mhm.
Courtney, I'm kind of giving you a long setup, but what do you think about all that?
So I do think that there is freedom in our DNA, particularly in the United States. There's a gene, it's called the DRD4 with the seventh allele. And this is typically attributed to risk taking gene. Typically, they attribute it to financial risk taking, but there's overlaps to other types of risk taking. And when I think about the people who founded this country, they took tremendous risks to do that, to leave their security, right? Give me, if you're willing to, Ben Franklin, right? If you're willing to trade a little bit of freedom for security, you deserve neither. This is very much how they live their lives. They live their lives by those types of, uh, sentiments. Give me liberty or give me death. So I think that if we think about genetics, I actually do think that there is a high percentage. I think they're trying to breed it out of us. And I think our education system has actually been quite effective. They intentionally designed it to breed compliance rather than independent, critical thinking skills. So I think it's being bred out of us, but I do think that Americans are largely people who do have risk-taking genetics. That would make logical sense to me. And to think that I think all people to some extent do. Although I will say there are people who are much more comfortable being complacent. Not everybody can be a leader. There are
Right,
people who follow.
exactly. Oh yeah, I
Um,
don't fault people who aren't
yeah,
leaders or
no,
don't have a
but I'm
desire.
just
Right,
saying it's not everybody. Like that it
right,
wouldn't be the society wouldn't function. So I do think that there were genetically a large component of uh, you know people with risk taking DNA in the United States, and I think that's intentionally why they're trying to breed it out of us. And then what was the other part of your question? I think I lost it.
Oh, no, 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 as we're talking about freedom being in our DNA, we're talking
And
the
you're
document.
talking about the Ten Commandments being
Yes.
about freedom, not about laws. So I think that to some extent, I agree. I think that it's that people often think freedom it just comes like it's just this blanket thing that's handed, and that doesn't actually make sense axiomatically. It has to come from somewhere. So this idea of there being a creator that endows free will, it's like you have to be free from something, right? You can't just have
Right,
freedom in a vacuum. Then what is it that you're free from?
right,
So but freedom, in order to preserve freedom, you exercise freedom. Freedom is something that needs to be preserved. I don't like the word fought for, but there's duties involved in exercising your freedom. And so I think the Ten Commandments are more, I can see how you would say they're linked to freedom, but I think it's more about how are we supposed to operate in a society where human beings have free will unless we have, like I had talked about in economic principles, it acts as the checks and balances. So unless, because human beings do have the capacity for sin, and we're fallen, we make mistakes,
Right.
there's some not so positive attributes sometimes, and
Wait,
so
who makes mistakes? No,
yeah, yeah, I do all the time. So I don't know about you, but I do. So, but I think that to counteract that, if there's an understanding that here are the code of ethics, and if we all, agree to uphold these code of ethics, and in this case, we're talking about the Ten Commandments, then we will live in a society where we can uphold freedom. We can maintain those freedoms because we have a founding level of trust and respect. And this is, that's what I really think the Ten Commandments are all about. I mean, they're pretty basic, like, thou
Right.
shalt not murder, don't take my stuff, like,
Well,
you know.
I guess when I say that they're a reflection of freedom, it's
Mhm,
almost kind of being in hindsight, where, yeah, when you think about that, God's only given us 10 things that we can't do, basically.
mhm,
You know, reflection on freedom to me is that look at all the things that you can do. I mean, like, in this world with God giving us free will, he's basically just saying, hey, here's some guidelines.
mhm.
I'm giving you free will, but here's some things you cannot do, which when you think about it in comparison to federal government in America, all the rules and regulations are federal government. They've
Yeah.
given us thousands of laws of things that we can't do,
Yeah,
we can't
that's all
do.
about control.
Yeah,
When the
exactly. And that's
commandments, I
more
think, are saying that if you were to abide by these things, then people can be free and the society will function. But if you don't abide by these very basic things, you're going to have chaos ensue.
right.
That's going to happen. And it's very hard to be free in when people are living in a jungle mentality. I mean, you're not free when you're worrying about somebody, like, killing you, or coming down and hunting you to steal from you, or, these are the very basic things that they say don't do. And if everybody were to follow that, then you would have much more freedom, because you would have less chaos, and there would be, more basic order. So,
And maybe then if people follow those basic rules and laws, like our founding fathers reflected upon with our Constitution in the very beginning,
mhm,
before politicians in years in generations afterwards created all these thousands of laws, especially with the tax codes.
oh yeah,
And you look at all this, and we realize that we are basically opting in tyranny.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
we're choosing to have people take away our liberties. That's it's always, but this is, I think it's because when you look at from biblical framework, and I'm not saying you have to subscribe to the biblical framework in order, but but this makes sense, because this is how they operate.
right.
But both God and Satan want to be chosen, right? They can't impose upon you to be chosen. And so that is how the Luciferians operate too. That so you have to choose, otherwise it doesn't work. Their whole system, they haven't won if you didn't choose. And so I think that's a huge part of why it's always this kind of like revelation of the method type of opt-in system. And I really warn people. That's why I try to tell people about the plans. And yes, people say, well, that sounds crazy. And I'm like, well, go read it for yourself, because they tell you their plans. And my hope is that by telling the plans, maybe people will be a little bit more perspicacious in the things that they agree to, because it's very incremental. This is, the Fabian socialist model of incrementalism. Their mascot is the tortoise. For that slow and gradual. Their name is actually comes after Fabius Maximus, who's in order to defeat Hannibal. It was this whole idea of like slow and steady wins the race, but that when they strike hard, and that you see that actually on
And what group is
their
that
graphic.
again?
What?
And what group is that again?
The Fabian Socialists, Fabian Society.
Okay.
Their coat of arms is actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, and I think that's a nod to the Hegelian dialectic. But they do, it's gradual, it's incremental. And so It doesn't typically happen all at once, although often it feels that way because they've been slow and steadily building it. And so that's why I try to warn people, because they'll lay all of these, like, did I ever think growing up that I'd have to take my shoes off in an airport? When I go to other countries, you don't, by the way. Somehow they're not
Really?
all, no. To this day, most countries you do not take your shoes off. And actually, in this country, you don't always take your shoes off. It's totally arbitrary. Totally arbitrary.
It's
This
it,
is
it, it's
all
it's
about
it's more
control.
about control. That's right.
Well, and it's all about conditioning. This is mind control. They're conditioning us to comply. Suddenly it's okay to be molested when you go through an airport. When you go through TSA, they want to pat you down, touch you wherever, no problem. And people don't say anything. And you really think about it, I mean, it's very invasive. When they first released those scanners, like the Lido scanners, you could see everything. Who knows what porn sites they're selling that to? I don't mean to be graphic, but I mean, think
Right.
about it. So we all complied with that. Suddenly that
Well,
was okay.
I've had a long ongoing joke that I don't talk about in my podcast. I talk about more when I speak in public.
Mhm.
I say, it's like the cameras that are everywhere.
Mhm.
They got cameras everywhere. I said now they're even putting cameras on the urinals and on the toilets. And I always wait for somebody to say those are sensors. Those aren't cameras. And I said, are they? I mean,
Yeah.
how hard is it to put a little sensor? I mean, of course, why would they want to watch somebody? But then again, it's another way to have an eye on you in a private area that you might be trying to hide, or you might be trying, if they got little cameras everywhere, but and I'll leave my other jokes to off the air.
But it's true. So I mean, but this is slow and gradual, right? They scared us into thinking we have to do this for our safety. Somehow other countries are fine
Right.
without doing it, but for our safety, this is essential. And then they, slowly erode and chip away at our freedoms and our liberties by, building over time. But I don't think they could have jumped to something like what happened in 2020 if they didn't already have 2001, if they hadn't already created the Department of Homeland Security, which I got into a whole fight with people on Twitter because I was like, we're not a homeland, we are 50 United States. That was very intentional. That's why we
Right.
have the 10th Amendment. We are not a homeland. And people are arguing with me. They're like, I don't know, I'm from America, this is my home. And I'm like, why don't we just this stupid, I
Yeah.
was like, why don't we just start calling
It's
it
not like you're
Mother America? I mean,
mother.
like, really?
It's not like you're not taking away their pride you're not trying to take away their pride in America being
No,
their home.
no.
You're just trying to show the intentional use of the word homeland
Yes.
to be able to create that, you know, mother or that the government is God and government is in control. They are the
Well, it's this
homeland
idea of
that we need
creating
to.
this very centralized unit that has power
There you
over us.
go.
And it's not true. We were designed to be 50 United States. So you don't like the policies in California, you can go move to Texas, where they have some
And
laws.
why like Roe v. Wade, they're trying to say that Roe v. Wade is, they're trying to get that. Oh,
There's
the Republicans
nothing
will
in
get rid
the
of it. There,
Constitution that stipulates that says anything about
if
abortion.
it, and even and I'm going to tie those two together. When our founding fathers created the United States, there weren't 50 states at
Right.
a time, but they created the pathway to say, hey, you're independent, and like Roe v. Wade is basically, it was a reflection of that independence. However, when you look at what the
No, Roe
Republic
v. Wade eroded that independence.
yes, and basically during the Trump administration, they expanded that independence when he gave it power back to the states. But the Democrats, going back to that political analogy, they want to create, a government as being the God and control of all of the rights. And instead of having independence at all, even when it comes to states, they want them to be part of the homeland, going back to that word. And so they're trying to say, well, they want to take away your abortion rights.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're expanding. They're basically trying to consolidate that freedom
Right.
back in under one control of the government or the god of their religion.
Yeah.
And now, although government has figured out how to pierce that that veil of freedom that the states have enjoyed with all the federal money that they give to the states through
Yeah.
the bureaucracies that circumvent our constitution on a regular basis, because
Right.
those bureaucracies are always creating rules and laws and regulations outside of the constitution that erode our freedoms and liberties on a personal level, while they also do it on a state level, piercing that 10th Amendment veil. How you
Hmm.
like that?
Great.
Courtenay, you are absolutely a wealth of information. I am so honored that you spent this time with me, and I'm always just enamored with the vault of information that you have, and grateful at the same time that you share it with me and my listeners. And
Thank
uh,
you.
and I and I can't tell you how much I appreciate and how grateful I am for that.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you in New Orleans.
Yes. Yes.
And I
We,
know you'll be telling your listeners more about that later,
yes.
but you know, do you have any final thoughts? Are there anything that you think is important that might wrap it? I always like to put a little,
Little
little
bow.
ribbon, little bow on it. Yeah, a little bow on it.
Um,
And you, I think, would have the prettiest bow of all. So, what do you think in your final words that you would like to recap here, or anything final you have to say for our show?
So my thoughts is that when people are thinking about voting, I know there's a whole movement trying to get people not to vote at all. There's obviously the left is pushing very hard for Kamala and Wallace. They have their campaign of joy, and who wants to fight against joy?
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
this is the same campaign that they ran in Nazi Germany, Strength Through Joy. So
Oh,
this is
really? I didn't know that.
yeah, it was really appealing to luxury and I guess like the hedonistic nature of people, but it was and it's no different than what they do with advertising and marketing today, but this was very specifically tailored towards like vacations and cruises, and there was a lot of propaganda and campaigning on this. Everybody should be joyful, and yeah, you can look it up. There's a whole Wikipedia page on it. Strength Through Joy. I think it's KDF or KDP. I don't remember the German initials, but yeah. So there's like an unwritten SGG zero. I just did a radio show. I think the video version will be releasing today, going into this, and it's on joy. The unwritten SDG zero is joy. So this is a big propaganda messaging for them. And what I would just, the reason I brought it up was really just that, I, while I'm not super optimistic about, I think they're really working both angles. I do think that there is a Hegelian dialectic at play. However, Trump is not a communist, and I think that's the strongest thing that we can inform people, is that he is not a communist. I think he's far from perfect. He's done many things. I don't deify Trump. I do not think he's God. I don't think he's going to
Right.
save the country. I don't think he's, and I even have some very serious concerns with him. However, the one thing I will say is he's not a communist, and Kamala Harris her father was a card carrying communist. Like, she's literally a communist. That whole phrase, what can be unburdened by what has been, is literally a hermetic principle. It's a hermetic principle of correspondence, as above, so below. I mean, she is a flat out communist. So, and Walz is possibly even worse than she is. So we just have to look at his policies during 2020. Look no further than that, and you will know everything you need to know about Walz. So, and that is, I think, the strongest advocacy for Trump that there is this country was not founded on communism. This was, we started to talk about our like founding fathers. We talked a little bit about the Masons, the Illuminati. I won't take too long going into that, but that's literally the genesis of the Communist Manifesto. So I would say vote against that,
Yeah,
because
right. Exactly.
that's what we should vote against. And it doesn't mean that we're voting for perfection or savior. And unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of pushback that we need to do. A lot of accountability needs to be held. And I would say that the best hope for that really is at the local level. People, unfortunately, especially on the right, they claim they don't want big bloviated government, and yet and they don't want a dictator, and yet what do? They sleep for 4 years, and then the federal election comes around, and suddenly they think the president's going to save them. So I would say I really encourage you to live by your convictions, which are supposedly that you want limited government, you want
Right.
grassroots, you want local level. So get involved locally. Take action, whether that's at your school boards. If you're a parent, that should be something really important to you. If you're a farmer, you should be getting engaged, because they are really coming after. There's this whole article, and this comes because I've seen some of the UN policies, but this is from Zero Hedge. But I've seen actually the UN policies on it, and it's called From Agrarianism to Transhumanism: The Long March to Dystopia, and they're talking about essentially terraforming everything, so everything is all synthetic. And I don't know what the implications for that for humans are with that. We've already seen the detriment seed oils do, because they are synthetic, right? This was the rapeseed oil that didn't sound so good, so it became Canadian national oil. It was really World War II artillery grease. And so I'm not saying that humans are pretty resilient, and yes, we can detox, but this was not meant to be food, and now it's in everything, so it's quite inflammatory. That's just one example. But
The grapeseed oils and everything you said, you went real fast on that point.
right.
Grapeseed oils and everything you said?
Yes, it's now in everything. Yeah, canola
It,
oils and everything.
yeah,
So,
the seed oils, and I just did a dive on the seed oils,
mhm,
because everybody's like, oh, seed oil. I mean, why would canola? They name all these different seed oils. Why would they be bad for you?
right.
And the two things I've learned is that they're good for you when they're still in the seed, because
Right. That's true.
but when
They're
you
not oxidized at that point.
yeah, but when you oxidize them, and then they process them and they
They become
bleach them,
rancid.
they become toxic to your body.
They're rancid.
When I think the only seed oil that's actually good for you is still olive oil and avocado oil.
Right. And
You
there's
know,
even those are not good for you when they're cooked beyond a certain point. So their smoke points are olive oil has a lower smoke point than avocado, but yeah, so all of this just to say that their goals are to create this, like, I call it a neo-feudal techno-fascist takeover, where we're all kind of siloed in like an expanded version of the metaverse. And I think the best way we can hope right now is to push back on that, slow it down. So I was talking about local level. I think local is really important. So whatever you're passionate about, get involved, whether it be the farming, whether it be education, or
raw milk or anything like
yeah.
that.
I mean, the chemtrails in Tennessee, we actually put a bill forth to stop the chemtrails. So whatever it is that speaks to your heart, get involved. We can't all do everything. It's just not possible. We can't even know about everything. So, that's just not realistic. But, do what you're passionate about and take some action, and especially at the local level. And I would say Trump is definitely, some hope for at least slowing down or derailing the plans, because he's not a communist. So,
But exactly. So, but going back to the Hegelian method, he's still that right side that keeps the spiral going up. I'll end on this. My analogy I'll throw in is that when we the people
yeah.
get involved, and like we were talking about a minute ago, get involved in what we're passionate about, we help stop that spiral, and we become spokes, in that wheel that
Mhm.
stops the far left and the far right,
Sure.
from creating a pathway to government being the God. And instead we find our own God and our own path to be able to find and practice our own freedoms and
Mhm.
our roads to prosperity. Would that be a
Yes.
good way to say that?
Yeah, the pursuit of happiness, right?
I
That's right
love
there
it.
in
I
the
love it.
Declaration
I
of
love it.
Independence. Yeah.
Courtenay, you're amazing. Thank you so much. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how much I appreciate your time today. But
Likewise.
I also want to invite people that, at this point in the show, with that, if they go visit you at CourtenayTurner.com, but also to get some more information on the things that you've talked about, they can go to cognitivelibertyconference.com, right? And they
Yeah.
can and they can see, a lot of speakers and a lot of information that you put on a show that you did on a conference that you yourself did just
Mhm.
a few weeks back. So this content is
It's
not
last
only,
weekend.
last weekend, but it's evergreen.
It's evergreen, and it's really timely right now. I mean, it's so important. But yes, it is evergreen information. This is really, it was very, as I said, the first day was all on education, but we go through historical roots, what the agenda and goal is, how we can potentially stop it, what are some things parents can do. And then the second day is political, psychological, dialectical warfare, which unfortunately is evergreen.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Courtenay, thank you so much. Hang on tight while I finish up with it, while I wrap up here and let everybody know to please share the show. If you are worried about America, where it's going, you want to find out how to get involved, find your passion. I would love it if you not only shared this show with somebody else, I'd be grateful for it. And I'd also be grateful if you checked into more about Courtenay Turner, because I've had a chance to get to know her for a while. And I can tell you that not only is she sincere and knows what she's talking about, but she loves this country, and she's helping it not only inform and inspire other people, but she's finding ways to help bring you to the information that is going to be most powerful to use. Have a great day. Thank you so much.